Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is Your Decision 2018, our special series on the Colorado primary and general election. My special guest today is the chairman of the Colorado GOP, the Colorado Republican Party, Jeff Hayes. Colonel, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure.
All right, Air Force Academy alumnus, graduate, lieutenant colonel, served our country for over 2 decades. I didn't know all that about you before. I'm very impressed with your background. Management consultant, you had a very successful career. Why in the heck would you want to be chairman of any party, Republican or otherwise? So tell me about that.
Well, it's not an easy job, but it's a challenge, and it makes a difference. But I really do believe in what we stand for as an organization, as a party, and we need good, strong, healthy political parties to succeed and have good government.
All right, so
it's an important thing to do.
All right, so tell me, what does it mean to be a Republican today?
Well, what it means for me personally is that I really go back to the Declaration of Independence. I do believe that men and women were created equally under God and under the law, and that government's proper role is to defend our rights to life, liberty, and property, and not determine your pathway to happiness. That's not the role of government. And so I feel like those values align with my personal beliefs about government and also with the Republican Party. The Republican Party, in its current manifestation, is standing for strength and freedom and prosperity. I think we are, working hard to keep people alive and free and hopefully have more money in their own paychecks at the end of the month, not less. So a lot of good things.
All right, well, speaking of good things, you mentioned more money in our pockets. Certainly we have, led by President Trump, a tax cut that is doing that. Of course, I could ask you to talk about deficits as well because of that. But talk about that. One of the things that intrigued me when you talk about values is the Republican Party historically has really stood for seeking a balanced budget, seeking really financial responsibility in the federal government. The party seems to have kind of, now that it controls the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and the White House, kind of gone off the rails on that. Has it? If so, why? And is there a way to correct that and get back on track?
No, I look at it as President Trump had probably a stepwise progression as to what he wants to do. We have not been able to reach consensus as to what legitimate government is at the national level. I'm big in federalism. I think that there are distinct things that government's supposed to do at the national, state, county, and individual level. We can't seem to get agreement on that at the national level. So by instituting this tax cut to beef up the economy, I have a sense, and I haven't talked to him about this, but it's going back to the Laffer curve. If you lower tax rates, people spend less time avoiding paying taxes, and there's a sweet spot in there where government revenues actually increase, and so we may be able to pay our way out of the deficit. We still do need to have good conversations as to what proper scope and the roles and responsibility of government, because that's where a lot of our tax dollars go. But giving people more money to spend, more money to invest, more money to take care of their retirement and their children's education, those are good things.
Well, I don't think anyone can argue with that, but I don't think the economy, any of the projections show the economy growing fast enough to cover the gap that was created.
And that may be true.
Well, we're going to
see.
Yeah, we're going to find out one way or another. Well, you mentioned the president. As a state party chair, you have a president now who's totally different than anything we've seen in our collective lifetimes, I think it's fair to say, whether it's tweeting at 4 a.m. or what else. Give me your take on the president.
Well, I think he's been very masterful in understanding that the national press was going to be an impediment to his getting the message out to the people. And in effect, he's done what FDR did with his fireside chats. And Kennedy was actually a pioneer in using television as a medium. I think social media is the new medium, and he's figured out a way of communicating directly with millions of people. And it's interesting the way he kind of plays the press, because the majority of people that hear about his tweets are not on Twitter, and they don't follow him on Twitter, but they hear about it because the press is reporting his tweets. It's really kind of genius. The content, he doesn't consult with me about his content, and there's only one Donald Trump, but I think the methodology has been masterful.
Well, once Twitter went from 140 characters to 280, I think he probably was celebrating. But no, to me it's interesting that people complain about him tweeting, including people within the Republican Party, of course. But as a journalist, I think it's great because you get the unfiltered, direct quotes. You get to see exactly what he's thinking, exactly how he feels. Of course, sometimes he makes a mistake and he'll say, "Oh, I was only joking." But most of the time we knew he probably was not joking.
Well, there's a cost and benefit to just about any decision we make, and so use of social media like that, there's a reward certainly, and I think he's tapped into it, but there is a risk. It's very different, and it rattles the status quo, and people that are part of the status quo, they don't like their systems to be rattled, and when he's bypassing these long-established agencies and institutions, it continues to ruffle feathers. People are still getting used to the Trump presidency.
How does it affect you as a state party chair?
Not that much. We as an organization, from the RNC to the state levels, we are behind our president. We support our president, our elected officials, because our job is not to craft policy as an organization, the parties. It's to get Republicans elected, to build the infrastructure, to organize, recruit, train, equip them with data and tools. And so I think I've got my roles and responsibilities pretty well lined out. It's a hard enough job to do all those things. I don't feel compelled to weigh in on each individual tweet or policy decision. I respect what they're doing. Anybody that can successfully get elected at those levels, they got to have something on the ball. And then the decisions that they make, we're not always privy to all the multiple facets that go into those decisions.
Yeah, you don't usually get elected president by accident.
No.
So as
You usually don't do it the first try either.
That's right. So in that vein, in terms of the president's role, the state party operation, a lot of laws have been changed over the past few decades in terms of financing, in terms of contributions that have really, in many cases, made it more difficult for state parties, regardless of affiliation. What's the challenge that you face as a state party chair? And what are the challenges the state party faces because of those changes in contribution amounts, limits, who can donate, et cetera?
That's a really perceptive question. I'm glad you asked it, because I think that parties are good for our system. If you don't have parties that collaborate and pull together common tools and processes and structures and things like that, you effectively have a series of personality cults, because each candidate in his campaign or her campaign, they have to reconstitute all the data, the processes, the organizational structure. They have to do some of that anyway to get to the primary. But it's the difference between project management and program management. It's a little bit of an esoteric use of the phrase, but that's kind of my background.
That's the management consultant.
Yeah, no, that's my background. And so, if you can do it once and flow it out, in my case, 64 times to the counties or even to the candidates, and you have economies of scale and efficiencies, that's better for everybody. And so our candidates can then go out and kiss babies and slap backs and win the hearts and minds of voters, and they don't have to worry about email lists and infrastructures and walk applications and things like that. So the party plays a really critical role, and it really stabilizes the system, I think. And again, it really is, you have strong parties, or you do run the risk of having personality cults.
So with the changes in finance laws, and how has that affected you? And how do you address that and still be successful?
Campaign finance laws in Colorado are some of the most restrictive in the nation. I talked to some of my contemporaries at other states. They have unlimited individual donations, they have corporate donations, and of course it ends up being a little bit of an arms race if both political parties have the same rules. But if you have more money, you can spend more creatively. You can attempt to do things in messaging, marketing, branding, and trying to tip the needle one way or the other. Because of our restrictive finance rules in Colorado, we tend to be focused on things that only we can provide. For example, the data, the walk applications. We obviously have to do the caucus and assembly process because that's a legislative mandate. So it ends up being organizational, structural, infrastructure, and we don't get as involved in some of the airwaves type campaign issues or political issues. Those are generally left up to the 527s, the independent expenditure committees. And I don't necessarily think that's healthy, because you have these outside entities that can accept unlimited money. They're not really accountable. At least in a party infrastructure, there's an accountability, because you have elections, you have internal processes where people can get elevated and they're held accountable for things. And so again, I go back, I think, for example, McCain-Feingold, those campaign restrictions, Amendment 23, I don't think they've necessarily been good for politics. They're not good for the party.
So what would you like to see change? If you could change one thing which would allow the party to have more resources, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, what would you like to see change?
I'd like to see some aspects of Amendment 23 repealed. I think there's some asymmetries in there that give growth potential to small donor committees. They give the Democrats, through their affiliations with unions, a greater advantage than we have. And it's an artificial, I think, an infringement upon our First Amendment rights, freedom of expression, to tell our voters, our people that want to participate, you can only give so much to these certain entities. It's too much control. So I'd like to see some of those restrictions alleviated.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with the chairman of the state GOP, Jeff Hayes, in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. I'm with Jeff Hayes, the chairman of the state GOP. So I'm really interested in a huge change and how it impacts you and your take on it. This year, for the first time in the primary election, unaffiliated voters will have the opportunity to participate. You have, of course, Democratic voters get a mail ballot, that Democratic primary ballot. Right. Republican voters will get the Republican primary ballot. But unaffiliated voters, and many of them are independents, but many of them lean one way or another as well, are getting both ballots. They're allowed to vote only one of the ballots. You can vote either the Democratic ballot or the Republican ballot, and if you make marks on both and return them, your entire ballot is invalidated. So tell me about, so I'm really interested in the process. Were you consulted, was the state party consulted, number one, and how involved were you in this decision to send unaffiliated voters two ballots? So let's start with that.
No, we were not consulted, and I don't think Democrats were either, and they probably were equally not in favor of it. It was a ballot initiative, Proposition 108, and the thought was, if we're going to have this primary and taxpayers are going to pay for it, well, taxpayers need to have a say, and I can understand that. Otherwise, it's a little bit like taxation without representation, and we know what that equals. So I understand the sentiment behind it. It was a little bit of an assault on our internal processes. I like to think that a private organization will have the authority to govern its own internal processes.
And you do. There's a constitutional case that went to the Supreme Court that says state political parties can set their own rules.
Yeah, and it's the nuances of the particular legislation, and the proponents of Proposition 108 were clever enough to institute an opt-out clause, and we actually exercised our opt-out clause, or at least the discussion of it at our state central committee meeting, and the body of people that were there, they decided that they wanted to stay with the will of the voters, and we're going to do the unaffiliated involvement in our primary. And so our approach, I don't look at it as an existential threat. These people have to vote for us anyway. We're trying to recruit them over to our side, whether they affiliate or not. And so the challenge is to not make it so prohibitively expensive, because now you have another third of the electorate that your candidates are trying to go after in the primary and in the general. So there is a cost associated with that, and that burden falls upon our candidates, who are already restricted by these, kind of coercive campaign finance laws that we just talked about. So I think what we provide as a party is data. We give them information, we give them access to our national voter and our database. and the tools and the applications and the analytical support so the candidates can go figure out who's going to vote for us or who's likely to and who needs to be swayed and what do I need to say to them. So I think we're giving them some tools to go out there and make it more efficient, more effective.
Do you see this potentially as a way to recruit people to the Republican side of the ledger? I mean, I could see TV ads that you're starring in, Jeff, that say, hey, unaffiliated voters, we've got an exciting primary in the gubernatorial election. Look at these candidates. Vote the Republican ballot. And then I'm assuming that if someone is unaffiliated and you bring them over to vote the Republican ballot, they might vote Republican in the general election.
So if I can quote my old boss, Fisher DeBerry, he said, "Man, recruiting's like shaving. If you don't do it every day, you end up kind of looking like a bum." And so
I thought you were going to say, if you don't do it looking in a mirror.
Yeah, you can really damage yourself. So every day I wake up thinking, how can we recruit more people? I mean, every politician wakes up every day thinking, how can I get more voters to vote for me? So that's my primary role as the Republican Party chairman, is get more folks onto our side. Now, whether they register as Republicans or not is not as important as whether they vote for us. And so we're trying to give them, our candidates, those tools to know who to talk to and what to say, because it ends up being a resource limitation. Nobody can be everywhere all the time.
Right, and they're more unaffiliated voters in Colorado than there are either Democratic registered or Republican
and that is so
voters.
Colorado. You know, Colorado's got an independent spirit, and that's why a lot of people moved here or they're proud that they grew up here, is that we don't like to be put in boxes. I'm proud to be a Republican, but I fully understand that we have a lot of conservative, libertarian, unaffiliated voters that just don't want to be labeled. They'll vote for us.
So, you know, so how many do you think, you have roughly what, 1.1, 1.2 million unaffiliated voters. How many of them do you think will actually participate in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary?
We don't really know. Now, the one thing that's good about having competitive primaries on both sides is that I don't think there's going to be a lot of shenanigans and organized crossovers and things like that, because the Democrats are going to have to take care of their own business. They've got competitive races in just about every statewide and a lot of key local races. And we're the same way.
Well, you have the gubernatorial race, but you have an incumbent Secretary of State. You have not an incumbent Attorney General, but only one candidate, it appears, running for Attorney
And we've got a
General.
competitive treasurer's race.
Right.
So again, because you can't pick and choose within the ballot, you have to go one side or the other. It's healthy when both sides have primaries. You don't see a lot of the silly crossover. So that was a concern with a lot of people about Proposition 108, that there would be people trying to pollute each other's primaries. That's always a risk, but I think it's probably overestimated.
Well, and that takes a lot of resources, too.
It really does. A lot of organization. It's hard enough just to organize your folks.
Yeah. Well, evidently the Russians have a lot of money, so who knows what'll happen.
Boy.
All right, we'll leave
You're
that
talking
one.
I'm an old Cold Warrior, so, you know.
All right, we'll leave that one for now. No, actually, you know, what's your take on that in terms of the fact that Russia appears to have really a permanent program in place to affect elections, certainly to sow discord. As a Cold War warrior, what do you think we need to do about that?
Well, I'm not surprised. Cyber protection is an ongoing concern. Countries are organized to not only defend themselves, but also to attack other people. And so we have to be very vigilant as a nation, as private companies, as entities, because there are countries out there that are trying to steal us blind. And so the same thing has happened in our electoral processes. The great thing about the American system is not highly centralized. You know, our Secretary of State, Wayne Williams, he's received a lot of kudos for the Colorado election system, and it's a carryover from Scott Gessler as well. Those guys have done a great job in making sure that our election system does have integrity, that, you know, the machinery and the hardware as well as the software is as secure as it can be. And so you see that across the country, that people can try to maybe not directly intervene. They can obviously use social media tools, they can use media, they can mask themselves as other entities. I don't like it, but there are mornings I don't like when the sun comes up. That doesn't mean I can do anything about it. Countries are always trying to influence other nations. And the Russians, because they've got an ex-KGB agent essentially, or an operative as their president, you know that they're going to be involved in these kind of disinformation, propaganda type campaigns. It's not a surprise to me at all.
Me neither, unfortunately. Jumping back, just to wrap up this segment on the primary, the open, semi-open primary. Do you think the fact that unaffiliated voters can cast a ballot in the primary election will moderate the tone of campaigns, the positions of campaigns on the left for Democrats and on the right for Republicans? Or do you think things are going to be pretty much the way they've been the past decade?
No, I think potentially it can. And you really almost have three levels now. For candidates that go through the caucus and assembly process on both sides, those people that are participating in that, they tend to be the more hyper-interested groups, and so you can message to them in a certain way. In a broader primary, even if it was not an open primary or semi-closed, like if it was a closed primary, you would still have to be somewhat more moderate because not all Republicans or not all Democrats think exactly the same way. But now that we have a different group that's not necessarily affiliated with a particular party, again, the challenge is to figure out who's going to vote, because not all 1.2 million are going to vote, and which ones are going to vote on our side and which ones are going to vote on the other side. That's why I think it's so great for us that there was a Senate bill that got passed last year that's going to allow us to get access to the data as to who turns in which ballots. Because over time you begin to realize that there are voting patterns. And I think it'll help us as a party, it'll help our candidates be more effective messengers, because you don't want to waste your resources talking to people that are just not going to vote for you. And so there's some things that are in place I think that will help our system. It could, if you have more moderate voters that are casting their ballots, they are going to tend to pick voters that reflect their values. So it could have a long-term impact on the type of people that are in our system.
I feel like a guinea pig.
Or something like that.
No, I think we all are. Well, it's going to be fun to see what happens. All right, we're going to take our last break. We'll be right back with Jeff to wrap up.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe as I do in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is Your Decision 2018, and I'm speaking with Jeff Hayes, the chairman of the Colorado Republican Party. So, Jeff, I mean, we've touched on things a little bit on dark money and campaign finance and things like that. I'm just stunned at the amount of money and how it has accelerated that's spent on political campaigns in the 2016 election cycle. Some estimates are that as much as $20 billion had been spent on all campaigns, federal, state, local, etc. And if you go back 20 years, the amount was literally only 1/10 of that. So an extraordinary explosion in expenditures, of course, and now you're in the digital age and you have money going to the internet as well. How does that impact campaigning in terms of people, voters really getting to know a candidate, in terms of the time candidates spend raising money, and your ability to recruit candidates, knowing that, hey, if you're going to run for office, some candidates spend 80% of their time or more raising money. So that's 5 questions. You've got 30 seconds to answer them.
I attribute a lot of this to the breakdown in federalism. If we had clear definition of what was proper at the individual, county, state, and national governance, because there is a vertical separation of power that's embedded in our political system, there's too much being done at the higher levels. And because there's so much being done, there's a huge lever at the national level of government, boom, boom. The consequences of failure or success are so great that people are willing to spend so much money. Look at the office of the President of the United States. it's a very important position, but it really is very limited. He's the chief law enforcement officer. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He's supposed to execute the laws that Congress passes. You know, the Constitution really is limited in what we're supposed to do at the national level. But because we've let this thing grow into this overblown carcass, it does so much. There's so many embedded special interests that people are willing to spend a lot of money to make sure their guy or gal gets elected. And that's true at the Senate, at the House, and at the national level. And so it percolates down. If government didn't do so much, people wouldn't worry about it as much. You know, the more it does, the more involved people have to be because the stakes are so high. And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of properly limited government. We need good government to do what they're supposed to do, but anything beyond that is just wasting our tax dollars. So the contest, I think, and they diminish the individual voter. Now, there's a certain amount of helplessness that seems to be embedded in the system, and it's wrong. Because if every Republican gave the state party $5, picture of Abraham Lincoln, we'd have more than enough money to do whatever we needed to do. You know, we could support our candidates. We would take the burden off the candidates having to go out there and relentlessly make phone calls to raise money. So there's some things that I think we could do legislatively in Colorado, if we really were thoughtful about it, that could make our system better for the candidates, for the parties, and really for the voters as a body. And I think we'd get better governance out of it.
How does the fact that a candidate usually has to raise so much money impact your ability to recruit good people?
It makes it very difficult. That plus the advent of social media, it's not like the campaigns haven't always been negative. I mean, go back to Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. I mean, they used to go at each other all the time and probably were more libelous than people are nowadays. But it's a special person that's willing to put their name and face on the sign, know that they've got to put their entire life on hold to relentlessly raise money and to go around and recruit voters. And, you know, it's an essential part of our system, but it really does make it difficult to find people that are willing to subject themselves. And when we have negative campaigning, not only within our own groups, but then between the groups, I mean, it's one thing to call your tie red, you know, that's a fact. But if I start making things up, or if I take little bits and pieces of the truth and concoct this negative narrative that's really not true, I mean, it diminishes the whole process. It insults the voters, and it makes it more difficult to figure out who the really good people are that need to be governing our country and our state.
All right, last question then. How do we address that? How do we address the fact that so much of campaigning is negative? And the fact, and what you mentioned earlier, that you have these third-party groups that are not accountable to the campaign or to anyone else, who can do whatever they want, and as a result, they feel they have license to do exactly what you said, make up stories, misrepresent facts, and essentially smear the candidate that they want to lose. How do we address that? What can we do to improve that so candidates have more of a level and really honest playing field?
Right. Well, I'm in favor of releasing some of these campaign finance limits, but making sure that people are held accountable, and there's some reporting. There's a danger in that as well, because you can start attacking people that donate to your opponents, and I don't believe that that's proper politics. But it ultimately comes down to voters being engaged. They cannot be apathetic. They cannot be disengaged. And I've told our side, because they've asked the same question: how do we keep this negative campaigning from going on? I said, vote with your feet. If a person or a candidate's out there and they're being negative, you feel like they're raising issues that are not relevant to their future performance as a candidate, or a legitimate concern that they may have about their opponent, then vote with your feet. Don't support them. Give them feedback. Correct them. The voters have so much authority, and it's a reflection of how low our voter turnout is sometimes. People need to get shaken out of their apathy. That's another job that I think my contemporary Morgan Carroll and I both have, is to rattle people out of their sense of complacency, because the power ultimately does lie with the people.
All right. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that was Jeff Hayes, the chairman of the state GOP. I'm Aaron Harber. This is Your Decision 2018. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.